When preparing food, it's important to have a separate cutting board for raw vegetables and for your meat. This is because the meat can contain contaminants and pathogens such as E. coli and salmonella that can contribute to foodborne illness if the meat is not cooked correctly. When the meat is on the cutting board, it is usually raw, which these contaminants can then be put on the cutting board, which can then be picked up by the raw vegetables. If it's picked up by the raw vegetables, and then the vegetables are then served, they can transfer these pathogens to the people eating the meat. When cooking meat, it's also important to make sure that your meat reaches a certain temperature using a meat thermometer similar to the one I have here in my hand. For example, chicken and other poultry should reach a temperature of 165 degrees on the inside. In order to check the temperature of your meat, take your meat thermometer and insert it into the meat, and then get a reading from the side. As you can tell, this meat is not yet done since it is still moving.
Alright, next, to talk about knife safety, we're first going to talk about sharpness. So it's important to keep your knives sharp, to store them either in a cutting block or with a little case over them, so the blade doesn't constantly get chipped up by just being thrown into a drawer with other metal knives. Also as important is if you're using a knife over a long period of time, that it continuously gets slightly and slightly duller, so you could use a sharpener every once in a while just to make sure you keep up a good edge on the blade. Sharpness on the knife is important because if the knife is not sharp, you're essentially putting two flat surfaces together and pushing really hard. Now that's number one, not going to cut your food, and number two, be really unsafe, because if you're meaning for the knife to go down and you push really hard on it, and it instead goes to the side, you're starting to cut in a direction you didn't plan for, which is unsafe. The next important thing is knowing what kind of material you're going to be cutting on. Now, almost everybody is going to be cutting on a cutting board. You don't want to use your hands or just cut things up in the air where it's going to be unsafe, but if you cut into something, you know where the knife is going, even if you press too hard. So, if a cutting board is made out of metal or something that's harder than the knife, you'll run into the same problem as earlier of pitting the knife or getting a little nick in it when you press down. Also, if you press down into something like this silicone board, you're going to be pushing into something that will, instead of pushing back at the knife, will kind of part in a way and catch the knife, instead of like cutting into this metal, will just push the knife away. Next is the importance of having a board that will not slip when you put it on the counter. This board has little rubber parts on either side that extend further than the board itself, so that if you put it down on the counter and you push, it's not going to slide out from under you while you're cutting.
There you go.
Next on knife skills is to have an important hand safety and clothing safety, as in keep your hands clean so that when you touch foods you don't contaminate it, and when you touch the knife you don't contaminate it for contaminating other foods. And don't wear long sleeves that could get in the way of your chopping or the motion when you're chopping. Next, if you're using a knife, you want to make sure that your hand has a good grip on it, firm grip, and that you're paying attention to where you're cutting instead of talking to your friend or watching a TV show or something like that. And next, we're going to look at the hand that holds the food. So this hand is most likely going to be in a claw formation, so that instead of sticking your fingers out like this where they could easily be cut over by the knife, you're going to have them where the fingertip actually points backwards, so the first thing that the knife would run into is the side of your finger that it can't cut, instead of the point of the finger that it can. So if you hold your hand in a claw and you push downwards in a circular motion so that the knife tip just doesn't keep swinging up and down where it's more likely to hit something, you can much more easily cut something than otherwise.
Okay, so before you start cooking, make sure that there are no loose items around the stove top. And make sure that if you have long sleeves that you roll them up. Any loose articles of clothing or cloth can catch fire easily on the stove top. Whenever you turn any of the coils on, there's normally an indicator light that tells you that at least one of the coils are on. Never place a pot or a pan that is too big on one of the coils. For instance, the diameter of this one is too big for the coil that it's on, so it's preferred that you put it on this instead. And accidents happen. Home cooking fires are the number one reason for house fires. So always make sure that you have a fire extinguisher handy and in the kitchen area for whenever you need it. As for the oven, take extreme care when opening the oven door. Make sure that there's enough space for you and anyone in the area when you're opening. Whether you're putting food in or taking food out, you want to make sure that you use either dry, heavy hot pads or oven mitts to avoid burning yourself. And if you do use hot pads, make sure that they're dry because wet hot pads can burn you very easily. And also, whenever you're done cooking, make sure that you turn off both the stovetop and the